Thank you everyone for joining us on this Friday afternoon. This is an event by Chicago Booth Women's Network, Chicago chapter. We are a community of women alumni from Chicago Booth. And these events are to celebrate accomplishments of female alums. But as you heard, men are also very welcome to our events to learn about our accomplishments and the topics that everybody's talking about. We are also open to future students, current students, and friends and family of our wonderful female alums. So welcome everyone. And I'd like to pass it on to Irina to introduce herself.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Irina Schlafer. I'm the city ambassador for the northern suburbs of Chicago for the Chicago Women's Booth Network. Thrilled to be here with you today and to bring you this insightful fireside chat with Deena John. We've all lived through so much uncertainty during this past year with the pandemic, and in a lot of ways that makes change and job search and things like that harder. But uncertainty can also mean opportunity and a time to learn from others. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Dina today. We will hopefully at the end have time for questions. So feel free to submit yours using the chat feature below, the chat option. And I will corral those and to the extent they have common themes, kind of aggregate the questions and present them to Dina at the end of the chat if there's time. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you, Irina. So a little bit about Dina. There's a lot to be said about Dina, but I'll keep it short to let Dina talk about herself and her journey in 2020. Dina is a global strategy and operations leader with 20 plus years of experience helping technology-driven companies scale for growth. She has worked in a variety of roles focused on business transformation and innovation in big brand companies like Microsoft, McDonald's, Groupon, Accenture, and Motorola. Dina doesn't get any bigger than like that list. Her extensive functional experience includes strategy, business operations, product management, project management, change management, Six Sigma, coding, testing, and sales. A lot of different areas of the business that Dina has experience in. She is also very much international, personally and professionally. She managed teams and clients across the globe in various countries: India, China, Singapore, Spain, Russia. But Dina is living in Chicago and has been for the past 15 years. And this topic today is going to be focused on Dina's 2020 journey of how to find a dream job in the midst of the pandemic. Welcome, Dina, to our fireside chat.
Thank you so much, Irina and Kate, for first of all, reaching out and sort of connecting with me and then giving me this opportunity to share my story. As you kind of talked through my bio, I was like, yeah, I have been pretty blessed to have had the opportunities I've had. And so, you know, like you said, COVID was initially a little scary and uncertain, but it was also an opportunity to see what's out there and see how I could help. So yeah, happy to be here to share the story.
Yeah, I feel with COVID, there's you really have to be determined if you are a half glass full or half glass empty person, right? That really kind of defines your experience with COVID. So Dina, why don't we start with you telling us what you were doing in March of 2020 when all of this unveiled?
Yeah, so I was at about a year into McDonald's at that point in time, and I was co-leading a really large innovation project that was focused on streamlining restaurant operations for the company. So AI in the drive-through, IoT in our different systems that we had, automation of certain kitchen equipment. The idea was to sort of put the customer at the center of everything, and which is something McDonald's was doing after a long time, and then sort of building out what could not just help us improve how we serve our customers, but also kind of help them have a better experience at McDonald's. And so it was really exciting stuff, building products from scratch. But then, we were getting almost done with development, and we're starting to think about how do we deploy when COVID hit. And when COVID hit, it hit us on two fronts. One was the franchisees who actually had to buy our products, and they could not afford to spend the money given that they were getting hit with traffic in restaurants. And then from our side to deploy, we had to have a huge investment to just build out the infrastructure for these franchisees to operate these high technology products that we were building. And so it was just not the right time for either to invest. And so there was a pause put on some of this for a certain amount of time, which then impacted a lot of roles. And I found myself on the business end of a job search. And so to say that I was surprised would be an understatement, but just because, one, we were in the middle of such a really exciting innovation. And two, to me, the way I was looking at it was, well, you know what, in times of adversity, to the point we just made, is when you have a lot of opportunity to innovate, to transform, to do more with, and think through what you had. So I saw it as a chance for potentially the company to accelerate, not slow down. So, but, different decisions made by different leaders, have different results for us.
Was there a big delay between COVID hitting the country and you finding out about the layoffs?
Not a huge amount of time, because we actually as a company had started getting affected with our China operations way before it came to the US. So Asia operations, to be more detailed about it. But yeah, so we were starting to see sort of a slowdown there. Things were getting impacted there, and then Europe, and then the US. And so from that timeline perspective, probably it was longer, but from just US, it wasn't a ton of time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how did you take the news?
Now, like I said, I was very surprised. I did not expect it. I honestly took probably the first month off to deal with, one, that it happened, and two, that it was happening during a pandemic. And so trying to understand what that pandemic meant, trying to get a bearings around what this could potentially mean from a job search was a lot to grapple with. And so I think I needed that 1 month to sort of do nothing, get accustomed with this new way of things, and then start to put together a plan and sort of hearken on my project management background and say, okay, what's the plan? What's the strategy? How do I go about this? And so I was compensated enough with the layoff that I knew I could use some time to think through what that right opportunity could look like. But again, given that the pandemic was something new and you didn't know how long this could possibly be looming, I had to, at some point of time, sort of get practical about it and see, okay, what's the right balance between finding the right opportunity, but also not dipping too much into my savings.
Of course. So you mentioned that you put together a plan of attack, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Did that plan of attack for finding a new job looked any different than anything other than, what you put together for prior job changes? Because you've been at multiple companies before, so it's not the first time you're looking for a job.
True, that is true. And I've been fortunate enough to sort of have those searches mostly while I've been employed. So it was definitely different. You're always at an advantage when you have a job in hand. So that's one first thing that was very different, which is, okay, now, am I truly in a position of disadvantage, or can I work it to my advantage? So first thinking through that and what that would look like. Second, with the pandemic, I wasn't entirely sure how would that play out. Yes, I knew it was going to be tougher because, again, we didn't know what people would have stopped hiring. They would have probably put a pause on it, which they did. Everyone was uncertain, so no one wanted to go and end up spending a lot of money hiring new leaders. At the level I was at McDonald's, I knew that was also going to be a factor. And ageism is also there. So, as you have build more and more years of experience, you have to wonder if that's also going to play a factor. So I had to sort of put all of that in mind. And as the job search went along, there was a lot of social uncertainty in general. There was political unrest. So all of that I knew would have some sort of an impact on my search. And so I had to be very, I had to think about it multi-pronged. One was sort of, the very obvious one is, okay, let's look at target companies. Let's look at what role should I want, et cetera. That's, of course, something I did. But on top of that, I also did a couple of other very practical things. One was reduce my expenses so I have a longer runway. That was the first thing I did, and become a little, sort of very smart about it. For people who know me, I like to spend money on stuff that I don't need. But I got a little practical about that. The other thing I then did was I very deliberately invested in myself, which was find an executive coach who had more experience potentially than me across a lot of companies, so who could understand the landscape while I'm looking. And so despite it being an expensive project or effort to hire the coach and then have that, kind of go on for us, who knows how long as I search for the job, to me, it was a long-term investment to find something that I was truly excited in, but also would not hopefully take an inordinate amount of time. And so this coach was a recommendation from a friend, and she turned out to be, or the company turned out to be very helpful in helping me think through my short-term plan, my long-term plan, connected me to their network of coaches, clients, and events. And so that really helped me kind of feel like there was someone in my corner, especially in this time when you're isolated from everybody. The next thing that really helped me was there was this job placement company that McDonald's had given called LHH that I think a lot of people have used at different points in time. While the coaching resources weren't necessarily exciting, what was really great was they had a weekly networking call with other senior leaders who were impacted due to COVID. And these were really extremely smart leaders across industries, across job roles and functions. We'd get on this weekly call for, I think it was about 2+ hours, walking through our strategies of how we job search, what was working, what was not working, which companies were looking. And it was such a great resource and such a great network to cheer me and others like me on, to support us, to sympathize with and empathize with our rejections, to provide tips. As an example, there were a lot of HR executives who were laid off who shared what they thought was happening from an HR perspective whenever you sent in a resume or you blindly applied. So all of those things sort of were huge motivation and great help in sort of keeping that engine running. And then the other thing that I had to change, which worked for me a lot before, was I have gotten interviews and even offers through blind applications, pretty much all through my career. I know it doesn't work for most people just applying, but it really worked for me. This time, crickets, nothing. So I had to then reach out to my booth network as well, start talking to a lot of people, doing a lot of Zoom networking, which is harder. But what worked in my favor this time was that people were really willing to talk. They understood that this was special circumstances. So I had a lot of people reach back out to me, talk to me. It also helped me sort of lose a little bit of that stigma that you have with losing a job. And so it felt a lot more acceptable to sort of go through some of that. And then I also found out the other positive of a pandemic, if you can call it positive, not to the families that were impacted, but in general, was location was no longer a constraint. I could apply to a lot more jobs while I continued to stay in Chicago and look at a lot more opportunities than I had. So using all of those things that I would continue to discover and make that part of my strategy really helped me sort of continue to iterate on my strategy and keep learning and keep growing. The other thing also I did was treat my job strategy was very much like a 9-to-5 job. I put a lot of routine around it, a lot of structure around it. I started my day with a workout routine. I was on this health journey to get healthier. So sticking to the workout, the food, bring some of that discipline in at the start of my day really helped me kind of keep the momentum. But I also then forgave myself on certain days that I did not feel like doing any of this. I gave myself permission to not job search and just watch TV all day or just Netflix, and then come back to it the next day. And so that overall, and I bring that up because I think the personal piece of it, especially during a pandemic, and sort of building those pieces of your armor are as important as a professional or a typical job strategy. So long answer, but I hope it helped answer the question.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for providing such a detailed answer, what you've done and how it worked out for you. I'd like to ask you some more about this executive coach that you found. So it came through a recommendation of your friend. So it's word of mouth, right? Yeah. What comparison or differences you can draw between working with a recruiter, who I'm sure you had contacts from your prior roles, recruiter versus executive coach?
So my personal experience, honestly, and it could be just me, but the recruiter angle has never really worked out for me. I have had people that reached out to me at different points in time, but the motivation for a recruiter almost always is the job they have at hand that they need to fill. So the motivation is not necessarily to help you alone. If it's a byproduct of what they're doing, absolutely. But I was looking for someone in my corner who had me at the center of what they were doing and helping me search something specific to my needs. I had tried a couple of different coaches over time. It's a lot of trial and error. And this recommendation coming from someone I know really well, who is very practical about her approach, but is also not someone who would lightly recommend anyone. For her to come and recommend this coach who had helped her through a lot of different career transitions that she did was helped me make that decision. We had long conversations even before I signed up. And just also the list of services that she would continue to provide, or they would, it's a company that has 18 coaches that they would provide over time, was really, a lot more than I've seen a lot of other coaches offer. So it felt like this wonderful package deal that I could kind of continue to access for different needs over time.
Got it. So for you, recruiting is more of a very tactical, short-term, kind of fill the role and move on kind of a thing, right? And executive coach is...
Yeah, sorry. That's what I've experienced. I've talked to a lot of different recruiters. I've talked to actually Booth alums who worked in these larger executive recruiting firms. And so they've tried to help, but I've noticed that it's almost always, for me at least, it's anchored around what they have at that point in time to fill. And the pandemic wasn't giving this huge set of opportunities, especially in the space I was looking for. So what the coach also helped me figure out, we brainstormed, we whiteboarded, virtually on what I would love to do in the long-term, short-term. If I had no constraints, what would I do? And sort of kind of thinking through that, we went the whole gamut from I want to write a book to, I want to become an executive coach myself, to what are the other things that I can do, mid-term, longer term, etc. So it was great to sort of think of that whole landscape and this range of things I could do or think through. And so the more and more I started thinking about it in the shorter term or midterm, I did want to work in a startup environment within a larger company that would give me the time, the flexibility to sort of work and think outside the box and kind of flex that startup muscle, but also be in an environment in a pandemic where the company has its resources and wouldn't necessarily fold in the short term, but where also I can leverage that innovation and transformation background that I built up through all the strategy and operations work I had. So to leverage what I did, but I was looking at opportunities. So I remember interviewing with VMware and getting to the last round and other companies like that. So it's all those companies that were recognizing the opportunity in a pandemic and were willing to invest in transformation innovation. And of course, mostly in the tech field, because that's where the advances are happening because of the pandemic. So
one of few sectors that has done extremely well in 2020 is tech. So before we move to tech and your new opportunity, could you talk to us about some of the low points that you mentioned, days when you were not feeling energized enough to continue the job search, or maybe, you've gone through rounds of interviews and you heard no. So how did you battle this idea of, I just don't need, and I think partially it's coming from me as a, fellow woman. And sometimes I think we think that we don't deserve or have to work harder for bigger, better roles. So knowing that you had that pressure of, pandemic and losing job, and you actually never job searched without a job on hand. So how did you battle or reconcile, your desire for better roles that would fit you long term with, oh my God, I might not be good enough. I'm just going to take this, let's call it a mediocre job just to fill the gap, just to get started on something because I'm losing my mind. So how did you, in those moments, did you have those thoughts? And if so, how did you work your way out of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, this is not the first time that I had to search for a job without a job. So I just wanted to correct that. But most of my career has not required me looking for a job without one. But this wasn't the first time, but this was the first time in a pandemic. Yes. And so yes, I went through a lot of those highs and lows. So there were certain times when you had a bunch of rejections sort of come back to back, or you've done an interview really well and you don't see it go anywhere, or you thought it was going somewhere. Yes, there are certain days that I would just kind of put pause and say, I'm not doing this for the next couple of days. On those days, I would try to look at what other alternatives I have. So the way I think about any search or any activity, I tend to like to have goals. I like to have a little bit of sort of, okay, how am I going to get there? For me, long-term inaction is hard. So I tend to get into that mode of, okay, what next? What should I, how do I then mitigate this? And so I started a little bit of consulting on the side. I did some small projects, sent out a few proposals and tried to build some steam there. Had hit and misses because building that pipeline during a pandemic wasn't easy as well, because mostly, vendors and consultants are the first ones that are dropped off contracts, especially during such situations. And so that wasn't the easiest thing, but I continued to build network and tried to do that. I did absolutely think about finding something shorter term to sort of tide over. But I realized that if I'm not passionate about what I do, or I'm not excited about what I'm doing, one, it's going to show. Two, it's just going to be hard to kind of keep that energy going, especially because it's a long job search. And so I have to keep that momentum going after I start the job. That'd be hard to do when it's not something that I'm excited about. And third, if I pick a job that way and this pandemic that we didn't know how long it was going to go continued, and that company had a downturn and I found myself on again another job search, it would only make things exponentially harder, because I'd also have to explain why I took this job if it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I looked at all of those things. And one more thing I didn't mention in my job search strategy, but overall I have done in my last two jobs onwards, is when I look for a job or when I look at a role that's being offered, I sort of think of it like a guy would. And let me explain that. When we women apply for jobs, we will look at it and it has to be 100% matched to what we do, or we don't even apply. Men will see a 30% match and they're like, I can do 120% of that. Nothing wrong with that. I think that's the attitude we all need to have, because at different points in time, we have potentially done those different things. We just don't see it that way, or it wasn't called out that way, and we tend to hold some of it back. So 2 jobs before this, I started, you know what? That's how I'm going to approach it. If I've done 30% of it or 40% of it, I know I've done elements of the other, or I can flex the muscles I have to do that, and I'm willing to learn and struggle through it. I'm going to apply and I'm going to be able to have that conversation. And I did. And so that really helped with sort of look at a wider range of opportunities than I normally would have. And I think I needed to do that, especially in a pandemic. If I sort of stayed boxed in, it would have made this journey even harder. And don't get me wrong, it took about 8 months plus to find this job. And so I think if I had sort of not continued to think that way, I probably could still be looking.
Well, I think being flexible is key to a lot of things in life, and of course, careers. And another angle that I personally think we should think about is, as a woman, like you mentioned, we have to qualify 100% and not 30, right? But then the question becomes, if you do qualify 100% for 100% of the requirements, you get on the job, you feel comfortable. Yes, there's 3 to 6 months of kind of, you know, getting up to speed, but what's next, right? You are probably going to be bored, feel like there's not enough growth. So for me, when I think we're thinking about choosing a job, right, it has to be something that we would feel excited about for 2 to 3 years, right? There has to be a room to learn, has to be a room to grow. And that's okay if we have not done 100% of the requirements.
Absolutely. And this is sort of the answer to the question, the interview question that almost every company asks is, you know, why are you looking for this role, or what are you looking for in a role? And I have about 5 things I look for. So one, it's sort of being in the middle of sort of innovation, or something that's net new that I've not done before, or the company's not done before. So it's something new. That's always exciting because it sort of gets you excited, or your energy, you're pumped up. Second is, but also an opportunity to leverage what I've done, which is growth at scale. Third is an opportunity for continuous learning. If, to your point, I get bored fast, and so if I don't have an opportunity to continuously learn, then I'm not growing. The fourth is the culture of the company, which is important. It should be about being able to fail, being able to iterate, giving you the room to do some of that. And so all of that sort of ties into that same thing. You can do all of that if you've not done it before. And so those are 4 big things, and the fifth is sort of that chance to help and mentor others. And so those are the 5 things I look for in a role, and that's sort of that lever I put when I was looking at roles and when I was having conversations.
Yeah, thank you. So now let's talk about tech. Through your job search, have you noticed that most of the traction you were getting was from tech companies?
Absolutely, yes. And my background a while ago was in tech. I did some of that. You mentioned coding. That was a while ago, but it was in IT consulting. I did some tech in Motorola, but it was a big gap where I was sort of industry agnostic. And so I was still open to looking across industries, but tech were the ones that were growing. I mean, Zoom, through which we're talking right now, was that first big company. Microsoft Teams was another, you know, because everything was virtual, right? So you had a lot of companies that had enablers around being virtual that were really growing fast. So more and more, it made me realize that that's probably the biggest bang for my buck if I had to concentrate my efforts and not spread myself too thin. And so looked at companies that were looking into zero security and trust, looking into companies that were doing virtual environments. All these enablers were sort of the subset of tech companies that I started targeting.
Got it. And how did Microsoft enter your journey?
Through my network. It was through, so at least, I want to say 10 boothies work at Microsoft. But the person who reached out to me was this ex-colleague of mine from Motorola. She worked at Amazon for, I want to say 5 years, and then she was at Microsoft for 5 years, right from when Satya Nadella took over, or around that time, and became CEO. And so she knew me well enough from our Motorola days, and she said, you know, I think you'd like really like working for this company, because the older I've gotten, the more experience I've gotten, that culture piece gets more and more important. I have to want to wake up and get excited to work, not just from the work, but the people I work with or the culture. And so she talked about the culture first and the growth mindset that the company really advocates for. And so that started the conversation. And Microsoft was really growing and continues to grow. And so I think I applied for at least 5 to 6 different roles. I interviewed for at least a couple. And having that person who knew me well and had some connections internally to at least get the resume passed, or at least to the recruiter, was very helpful.
Did the interview process differ from your regular interviews? I mean, aside of the fact that it was all virtual.
A little. I think the process was the same. You start with recruiter, you go to the hiring manager, you then have this final day, or 3 or 4 back-to-back interviews, which I had across most companies that I got to the final rounds of. What was new was I had the opportunity, or I asked for the opportunity, to go back to the hiring manager and have more conversations. Because usually you'll have that much and you sort of had to make your decision. I think being virtual helped me say, hey, I need to clarify more questions. I'm going to be working virtual, so I need to just be sure this is the right environment. And VMware, Microsoft, a couple of other companies, very open to continue to have multiple conversations.
That's definitely a positive, let's call it positive side effect of finding a new job during COVID. So how did it feel to start a new job in 100% virtual environment?
You know, a mixed bag. So it was definitely harder because you're virtual, and so you've got to build your knowledge. You have to come up to speed. You have to build your network. You have to build your relationships virtually. So not easy. But at McDonald's, I had to travel to, for those in Chicago or no Chicago, I had to travel to Romeoville 3 days a week, which was like an hour each way easy. So I didn't miss that. So that's why I said it was a mixed bag. So it was nice not to have to do that. My dogs were very happy that I was at home, but definitely tougher from building relationships, because I am also entering a company new, and I'm working with people who've had the time to have that in-person contact, those conversations, those coffee chats. So that wasn't easy. But the good thing was I had joined a transformation project that was net new. All the teams were being put together net new. So while people might have worked together and worked in Microsoft for many years, this whole operation was new. I was building a team net new. I had to stand up the transformation management office, which I'm still doing, net new. So everyone's sort of stumbling and fumbling through a lot of it together. So there's a lot more understanding. There's a lot more patience. And I can get into some of this more, but Microsoft has been doing a lot of very conscious work around helping people with burnout and working in this environment. And so that's definitely helped me with some of that transition.
How do your strategies change with kind of, building a team, getting up to speed, building those relationships with, the people that you have to manage and have to get some results out of at the end of the day?
Yeah, so it definitely changes a lot. So one, the same point I apply to myself applies to my team. I can hire them from anywhere now. So it opens up to a lot of amazing candidates. And so my current hires, one is in Germany, one is in Detroit, and I'm hiring for another that could be anywhere. And so a couple are in Seattle, but still it's that mix that I couldn't have gotten otherwise. So that's a change in one in my pool. The second is you have to get a little more creative on how you connect with your team and how do you get to know them. So not just me, but my boss started this with her reports, and I'm taking it to my team as well, which is a lot of one-on-ones, of course, but a lot of team conversations. We are brainstorming together using apps and tools that are available so we can actually think through, even in a virtual environment, and sort of understand how each other thinks. We are doing exercises. It's called insights, but it's kind of doing these personality tests together as a team, sharing the results as a team, and understanding how do you work with each other. All right, if I am red and yellow in color, and someone I work with in my team is the opposite, which is blue or green, how do you work together? So kind of actually putting time and effort into understanding that and coming up with ways to do that. We even play a clean version of Cards Against Humanity, which is called Truth and Insights, which is a way to get to know your team on more personal level, but in the form of questions and a virtual card game. So we're using a lot of those things. Another thing that my team has done, or my boss's team actually has done, is we do something called gratitude calls. Every Monday and Friday, we do half an hour of whoever wants to come on the call, get on a call. We get together and we just talk about what are we grateful for and how did we spend the weekend? What do we have planned for the weekend? And that's a way to just get to know people without any shop talk. And so that's been really helpful. As a company, Microsoft has added 5 well-being days. So you just take 5 days during the year to take off because you just have to. And I'm only 4 months into the new job, but I've taken 1 well-being day already because I it's a lot of hours sitting in front of your computer, back-to-back meetings. I go 8-9 hours of meetings easy. And so no one questions that. They're like, it's yours to take. And so I think these kind of things really help me to not just know my team or my boss's team or the near organization, but just a broader company. Microsoft just had a 2-day include, it's called Include. It was a D&I event, a diversity inclusion event that had every topic you can think about under the D&I umbrella. We were encouraged to take 2 days off to attend them. And I did attend most of them. And it was amazing the amount of work that was happening in that space. And I learned so many things I didn't know. So even that way, you learn sort of the culture of the company. You get to see how a lot of my peers were in conversations and chats that were happening during those talks, that you're like, oh, I didn't know that about her or him. So many ways that sort of have been, at least in the 4 months, really helped me cross some of those hurdles.
Well, it definitely sounds like Microsoft is doing a wonderful job at keeping people engaged and happy and mentally healthy during these times. And I also am hearing that you have an open role on your team. So for anyone who is looking, connect with Dina after the call.
I can happily talk more about that. I'm building out, as I said, the Transformation Management Office, which is portfolio management and change management. And I'm adding potentially one now and maybe more later in that change management space. And because, again, it's a multi-year transformation, there's so many ways things can go. You just have to be willing to embrace ambiguity and chaos.
Well, I think we all have been voluntold in 2020 to experience and be open to ambiguity and uncertainty.
Exactly. But, you know, I do not kid when I tell you there is a lot of that, because we are, as my boss likes to say, we are building the plane as we fly it. And so there's a lot of that that's happening that I actually love. And this is sort of a big part of why I took the job, but you have to have the stomach for that. And so even when I hire, I've been hiring a mix of internal and external, just so I could get that inside out and outside in view.
How are you setting the boundaries around not working around the clock? Because it sounds like you have team members who are in Germany. So there's definitely probably a need for you to be on the call at 6 a.m. Chicago time or maybe 8 p.m. Chicago time. So how do you manage your international team while having boundaries for yourself?
My first advice, get a dog. And I'll tell you why, because those are my boundaries. So in the morning, I give myself that workout time, 6 to 7, and then I walk the dogs out for an hour, because after that, I literally don't see them till 7 p.m. But again, and there's a dog walker who comes in between, but that 7 p.m. is also guardrails because they need to go out. So I have very clearly told my team from day one, you will get me between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. After, I don't take calls outside of those. I potentially come back and work for a little bit after that. So I do fail overall in keeping my hours balanced. But it is a new job. It is something I foresee and I expected in the short term. But having those guardrails right from the beginning is really critical, because most of my team or most of the company is in Seattle. They start their 6 a.m. And so when we were talking about whether I stay in Chicago or not, I was like, no, I like the time zone difference. I will come in I'll start at 8 o'clock when you start at 6. But that's where I also put my foot down and said, this is just something I need to do for myself. If I don't start with the workout, I'm never going to get it done. And I just need that energy to start my day, especially since I'll be sitting in one spot for 7-8 hours. And so that's sort of how I do put my guardrails. And, you know, I am working a little on weekends in that I shouldn't, but I also see that as sort of coming up to speed and just getting to that spot. But I don't foresee that as a long-term step I need to take.
Well, thank you, Dina. And I just have a last question for you. And after that, we will be opening up for Q&A. And the last question is, what is the Microsoft's vision for a return to office after pandemic? What are the expectations? What are you hearing from Seattle's company on when we're going to go back to office? If we do, how is it going to look like? And what are your particular thoughts on your team and how you will change your lifestyle to accommodate that?
Sure. So one of our EVPs has been that person who sort of owns the COVID response for our company. And so he gives out regular, I want to say every couple of weeks updates on how things happen or how it's going to progress. The last update was that September 7th is the earliest we could potentially go back to having close to whatever maybe normal hours in the office. It's still not going to be full capacity. They are still determining what that capacity is going to be, but it's not before September 7th. Even then, given our policy around hiring, and it came down from Satya's level to that we need to open up. We've been very focused on it being Redmond, just like Amazon is about being in Seattle, or Google's been about being in California or Mountain View. Satya has been very clear about we need to start embracing the diversity of thought, leadership, everything across this country, across the globe. So I definitely see that being part of the longer term strategy of how we bring people who are remote into the new ways of working. I expect some from the company. I've sat in leadership conversations that are my skip level leader where her reports have brought it in as a topic to discuss is how are we going to navigate this world? Because even that level of leadership is all over the country. So we're having very strong conversations around how we're going to make it work. I foresee spending at least flying to Seattle at least a couple of times a quarter, which I'm open to. And I think we've been talking about doing certain offsites from time to time whenever it actually gets back to normal. But I think it's one of those things that we've got to be flexible again and find a middle ground. The good thing that I've seen in my team and in Microsoft as a whole is they're willing to work with wherever you are in that journey. And so, I don't see companies saying, hey, we're going to limit you to 14 calendar days a year in the office post-pandemic. I definitely don't see that. I think there's going to be a lot more flexibility. I will be honest and say I do have concerns from a growth perspective that, if I wanted to move to the next role in 2 to 3 years, because Microsoft is very, they encourage you to go find different roles every 3 years or so. And so at that point, if I want to try something else, it's going to be harder, but it's going to take more concerted effort from my side to build that network remotely than if I were meeting someone, on a coffee break in Seattle. And so that's where I do have to figure out how to navigate it. But just from all the responses I've seen, I'm not very concerned, but it is probably a strategy I have to build.
Well, thank you, Dina, for all your answers. And with that, I'd like to open us up for Q&A. Irina, have you gotten any questions from the audience through chat?
We have a couple questions in the pipeline, and then we can take additional questions as we're talking. So, Dina, you mentioned that when you look at a role, you are trying to say, okay, do I know 40% of this role, and not looking for that 100%. So one of the questions from the attendees is, how do you get your employer comfortable with knowing 40% of that role versus 60% or 80 or 100% of that role? And I would expand that question a little bit and say, how do the people that you're hiring get you comfortable with knowing 40, 50, 30% of that role instead of 100?
Absolutely. So the big part of that is looking at what are the functional aspects of the role that are necessary to what are some of the software aspects of the role that are necessary. So often enough, I won't say just leadership, I think it's at all levels, but especially so once you cross sort of the director and above, is you have to have as much soft skills as the functional roles. In fact, more so. So I look at all the skills that I have built indirectly or directly, and how are they transferable in this new environment? So if you tell me that I'm looking for someone who does has worked in AI and IoT and this and that, I may not have all the technical related skills or know all the technologies, but what parts of that or in functioning in that role do I have or can be transferred in this new capacity? So I wouldn't have done it in this exact setup that you want, but guess what? I have the skills to influence. I have the skills to work with ambiguity. I have change management that you can apply here, or I can have product management that I can apply, that I've applied in this telecom environment that I can take over into an AI-based environment. Or I've worked with teams that built out AI products So I know what it takes to, go through, work in a very agile environment, work through sort of building user stories. And I'm using this as random examples, but I know all those pieces of the puzzle that I can then transfer over. So it may not be one-to-one, but if you build enough of a story of how you can pull those pieces along, same for my team, if you can tell me how you can leverage what you've done into this new environment, often leaders are looking for, what have you done differently? Especially in the environments like transformation or innovation, you don't want someone who's sort of done exactly the same. In fact, in my team, what I was looking for is I have people who work 22 years in Microsoft in my team, and they bring that sort of inherent knowledge of the company, of those pieces of work. But I want someone who's going to come on and shake it up and say, well, when I worked in finance, this is what we did. And so that's where having that mix, and this is where I think that diversity piece is so important. It's the diversity of thought, it's the diversity of experiences. All of it comes into play and makes your team stronger, And so that's sort of how I build that story around it. I hope that helped answer the question to whoever asked.
No, that's very helpful. This touches on this a little bit. So clearly you value a certain culture that lets you, fail and reiterate and bring new things into the mix. What are some questions that you ask during the interview process or during the interview conversations that help you understand the culture of the company you're joining and the team you're joining? Because I think sometimes there's, pockets of culture within different teams as well. What kind of questions do you ask to get at some of that information?
So the first one will almost come back to the last question we had, which is what's a team built up of? Like, what's the experience of the team that's there? Where do they come from? How is your team built up? If I see they're all entirely people who work together in the same environment for 20 plus years, I'm going to be really wary of being able to come in and make that change. And I've had that happen in a couple of other roles where you walk in and you have been brought in to bring in that change, but it's such an insurmountable task to begin with that sometimes, you have to kind of weigh those options. So one is looking about how is my boss building up her team? How am I expected to build up my team? So these are questions I definitely ask. I ask about my skip levels approach to problem solving. I ask my boss his or her approach to problem solving. Are you allowed to fail? Or give me an example of when was the last time you tried something and it didn't work. And so if that's the piece of culture I'm looking for, I'm very direct about some of those questions. I was reading the book Mindset coincidentally, not knowing that that's a book that Satya Nadella, like really, it's one of our principles in the company, is that growth mindset. So I was looking at that because I was reading the book to say, do you have a fixed mindset where you know everything when you walk in, or are you in a growth mindset where you're willing to learn along the way? And that's huge in any role. None of us are experts. We'd love to believe we are, but if we walk in or we walk into an environment where everyone thinks they're the experts, it doesn't at least work for me. And so asking questions around that. Do you truly embody what you say is your culture? I've had interviews when I ask people about the culture and they're like, yeah, we like to be, structured about this. We like to do, and they start describing like not culture, but like the job related things. That's when I get an answer that you don't even understand the question about culture. Like there are easy gives. It's shocking how a lot of companies, when you talk about culture, it's about, I don't micromanage. And I'm like, that's not culture. And so it's about sort of asking very clearly what your culture and your values are. They always have them on their website, and ask questions around those and which ones are important to you. Now, not every value or culture piece that every team's going to have or every company has been successful at implementing. So which ones are important to you? Honestly, ask more questions about it. And especially during a pandemic, or if you don't have a job, it's easy for you to not ask those questions because you want the job. So I would encourage you to, if it's important to you, ask those questions.
Great. Can you share some tips for women, especially, to increase their confidence when they're looking for a job or dealing with rejection?
Oh, that's a good question. I look for a mix of male and female advocates in my life. in my work environment, in my business school environment, who I know will, one, give me honest advice, but will be my champion. So that's the first thing I look at, is who can I kind of lean on to help me think through some of these things, or to even think through my strategy, or to even help bolster my confidence after I've had a bunch of rejections. So I look, so male and female both, and I've not been very good at it before, because I think I've struggled for a long time with showing vulnerability, especially as a woman. When we struggle a lot more in the workplace, we're as strong as everybody else, and we're not going to cave. So
sure.
Brene Brown's books have helped me sort of get a little more better about being vulnerable, and then talking to people who can help me deal with that side of things. And so, as an example, I was noticing, and this doesn't directly answer the question about confidence in work, in finding a job, but this helps build confidence in your work environment. I was noticing in a couple of my meetings that I was attending, I would say this idea, and 5 minutes later, a male colleague would say the same thing, and everybody like, great idea, that's wonderful. And I noticed a few times and kind of let it go. And then I was sitting in that Include event, and one of the speakers, Dolly Chug, who's a professor at Stern, brought an example of that. And then I remembered also Valerie Jarrett talking about how she had to find allies within the cabinet. There were other women who would sort of help her get her voice out, because she would also have that happen in President Obama's cabinet. And so I reached out to two of my male colleagues who started at the same time as I did. And I said, hey, you know what? This is what's happening. Can you have my back the next time it happens? It could be because they have more credibility and I don't, because I'm new. It could be because I may not be messaging in a way that it's landing. I'd love you to, one, give feedback, but also if you notice it happen, go chime in and just say, hey, +1, Dina. And so reaching out and asking your male colleagues or your female colleagues to help, or your network, I think for me, that was a big one. My family is also a great supporter. All along, my dad's always said, you can do anything any guy can do, any male can do. So reaching out to them sometimes to sort of kind of give me that little boost really helps me get some of that confidence back. And I think just being willing to learn from the failure or the rejection, and thinking about it as being, hey, it wasn't meant to be. That's how I had to play out even the ones that I got rejected from, because I would like reach final rounds and they were like, sorry, we went with someone else. And I'm like, something better is out there for me, and this wasn't meant for me. And finding a way to kind of have that conversation with yourself and move on. And so those are the things that helped me building confidence. Also, the other thing was just, I think giving back in a certain way is a little left field, but I have spent a good amount of time, not just with my family, but with my friends, helping them and giving them advice. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love giving advice and, sort of being the one spouting it out, but I think it's helped them in their journey. And in turn, that's helped me realize that, okay, there are things of value that I can add to conversations, to helping somebody else. And that indirectly just builds your confidence up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's actually a great segue. Speaking of advice, so you had mentioned hiring an executive coach and working with this company to help you along in your process. What is some advice that you've gotten from your coach or from the conversations with the other leaders who are also searching for opportunities or kind of, moving along their career path? What is some advice that has stuck with you that you think you will carry with you past this pandemic environment?
So a couple of things. One is, you don't have to fit the job. The job has to fit you. And so it sounds very, one of those things that you hear, in quotes that you see. But honestly, the more you start thinking about it that way, and the more my coach started telling me some of that, is when I realized if I didn't do that and I sort of fit myself too much into something that I didn't want to do or I was not excited about, it wasn't going to work out. At some point it was going to give, either from my meeting expectations or just the job not meeting my expectations, and then you end up looking again. And so making that job fit you is critical. Not seeing, not worrying about that short term, and not letting that drive your long-term decision. So a lot of it, that's where the question, Kate, you were asking is, did you want to take something short term? That's where my coach helped me a lot to say, you know, what's the value in the short term? If it'll get you and tide you over for a bit, you'll get a paycheck again, but is that going to lead to you looking again? And the third thing that she said, that was more personal to me as a person, but she said, you often don't realize how fast you get to where you need to get to from a strategic perspective or for how you think, that you sometimes don't give yourself enough credit. And so like I was like certain things, I'm like, am I as strategic as I think I am? And so I would sometimes question myself. Even that journey to looking for something that's 40%, it didn't happen overnight, of course, right? So the longest time it was, am I strategic enough? I want to do strategy roles. I want to do strategy and operations, but am I just fooling myself? And then having some of those conversations with her, with others who are like, no, you actually think a lot more strategically than you give yourself credit for. And so sometimes going back and reflecting and thinking through about, what do I mean by strategic, or what is it that I'm doing? And often enough, it's small things that you do that you don't even realize because it's a little bit of a second nature for you. So taking that time to reflect and kind of get others to give their view of you really helps. And so it started with my coach, but then I would go back to friends and others and say, hey, what are the 2 things that you think I bring to the table? And then that helps with the confidence, that helps with me thinking about, oh, is that truly what I wanted them to do? And now that I got into this job and I'm doing sort of building out the methodology, the strategy for my transformation management office, I'm like, I really love this stuff, you know? And so it suddenly reinforces and, you know, validates that, yeah, these are the things I like or I'm good at. Thanks, Bill. And so, yeah, so all those pieces of advice sort of helped me, especially when I was going through ups and downs in that job search.
That's fantastic. I think that's, first, I'm so happy that you found a role where you feel so engaged and so excited about what you're doing. That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to end the webinar with all this wonderful advice that we can take back with us and digest and apply to our own careers. Kate, anything else?
No, really, thank you, Dina. For me, my takeaway is that Microsoft is a wonderful company and is currently hiring. And the second takeaway is really that piece of advice of reaching out to your male colleagues and asking for support, asking to back you up, right? In case, like in your example, the idea sharing example, right? In case that happens to you, there are ways other than just take it back home, internalize it, think that life is unfair. And, you know, as women, that's what you need to deal with. There are other ways to handle it. And I love that example. Thank you very much, Dina, for sharing it with us. And thank you, everyone. I see that people are signing off. So thank you for joining us for this Friday lunch. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. If you have any feedback, submit it to me or Irina. You can find our emails on the website. And also, if you have anything for Dina, please just go through us and we'll contact Dina for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, Kate, Irina, to just share my experiences. And yeah, happy to connect with others or help others with any questions they may have. Have a wonderful,
wonderful story. Thank you, Dina. Have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.